In this video, we're going to look at the Russian Revolution. Um, Russia was an absolute monarchy and had been ruled by the same family, the Romanov family, for centuries. So it was very, very well ingrained. Um, Absolute monarchy, total power. Everything we've learned about absolute monarchy before. The actual czar, which is what Russia called their leader at this time, was Nicholas. Okay, so Tsar Nicholas here, and this is his wife Alexandra, who was German, which prior to World War One breaking out, not a huge deal, but once World War One does break out, and obviously Russia's at war with Germany, it becomes an issue. Okay, so here's our Nicholas, the Tsarina, his wife, and here's their family. All right, as you can see, mostly he's got a lot of daughters, and he's got his one son, Alexei, here. Okay. Um, his daughters, this one you might have heard before, and this is Anastasia, and this we'll talk about in a little bit, her story, or potential story, I should say. Okay. But of all his children, he loved them all very much, but Alexei is the main one. He's the son, he's the heir to the throne, he is the apple of his mother's eye. He is the one that they care about the most. And there's a problem with Alexei. Okay, Alexei has a very rare blood disease called hemophilia. All right, hemophilia is you get cut, you scrape your knee up or whatever, and it bleeds, and then eventually you have this thing in your blood called platelets, and they stick together, and they clot it. They stop the bleeding. You bleed for a little bit, no big deal. It stops. You're fine. Well, Alexei and other people with hemophilia are missing that particular quality of their blood. So when they bleed, it bleeds and it bleeds and it bleeds. Even minor, cuts that would be no big deal for us are very serious for people with hemophilia. They also bruise very, very easily and really, horribly, because bruising is basically just bleeding under the skin. Um, so he's very fragile, very delicate, and his parents very worried. Nowadays, we can not not cure necessarily hemophilia, but we can treat it. I actually had a student with hemophilia when I first started teaching, um, and we can actually isolate the factor that's missing and artificially put it in. So he was still kind of he was miss some school here and there. He was still not you know perfectly healthy, but it's not like a life. I didn't have to be like, oh my gosh, if it gets cut, like this kid's gonna die in my classroom or something. Um, we can treat it today, but at this time there was nothing. They had no treatment for it, didn't know what it was. Um, so if you had it, it just was what it was. So he had it, and they were very, very worried. So the war breaks out. It's not going well for Russia. Russia is not as well industrialized. They're lagging behind the rest of the world. Like they're literally charging horses and cavalry into machine guns and just getting wasted. So to help the war effort, the Tsar Nicholas goes to the front of the war to try to lead his troops. He does a terrible job, and people of Russia are really upset. But it leaves Tsarina at home, kind of basically be in charge. Well, she's desperate to try to find someone to help little Alexei here, and no one can help him. They have no idea what to do. Then she hears about this guy, this mystical healer, from Siberia in Russia, and he can supposedly heal people, and he's a holy man. And she's like, hey, let's give this guy a shot, and this is the guy. So this is one of the creepiest looking people. This guy's name is Rasputin. You may or may not have heard that name before. Rasputin, again, was this kind of holy man who supposedly could heal the sick. And so the Tsarina's like, hey, let's give it a shot. Now here's the thing. Rasputin is brought in. And according to the sources that we have, Rasputin is actually able, when Nikolai has some cuts and stuff, to help and actually stop the bleeding. Um, so he actually, according to what they say, he's actually able to help. How he does this, obviously he doesn't have magical, mystical powers. Well, maybe he does. We'll talk about in a second. What people think is that he, one, either hypnotized Alexei, um, and kind of like calmed him down, which lowered his blood pressure, which made it easier for his lowered his heart rate and his blood pressure, made it easier for his blood to clot. There's not as much pressure pushing the blood through, and so it clot. Or that Alexei was drugged, that Rasputin drugged him, which basically had the same effect. So whether through hypnosis or some sort of chemicals given to Alexei, drugged him, and that calmed his heart down, which allowed his body um, to clot the blood. However he did it, accordingly he did it. That's what the sources say. And so he now becomes like a hero to the Tsarina. He's like everything to her because he can actually help her child, her son, and no one else seemingly can. So she takes him in her inner circle and she makes him a court advisor, and he's given all this power and stuff. And there's lots of problems come out. Like Russia is in chaos. It wasn't in a good spot before the war. There was a lot of problems. There was poverty, inequality, a lot of turbulence before the war, and now people are dying, by the hundreds of thousands. The infrastructure of Russia's apart. There's terrible leadership, and people are upset. And now they see there's this German in charge, and she has this weird, creepy advisor, and there's all these like rumors that she's having an affair with him, and all these gossip and stuff, and this just adds to the discontent of the people. Meanwhile, Rasputin is like, hey, everything's fine, don't worry about it, and even though others around the Tsarina are advising her, like, hey, like, this is a problem, we got to deal with this, and she's like, nah, Rasputin says it's fine, don't sweat it. So the country continually is just spiraling out of control. So eventually, the people around Tsarina realize this Rasputin guy's got to go. Like, he's super unpopular, he's super creepy, he's like disgusting, and he smells like he doesn't have good personal hygiene. They don't like the power he has, and like he's just super creepy guy all the way around. So they plot to assassinate him. Rasputin is a famous glutton, eating and drinking and all kinds of stuff. So what they do is they use arsenic and cyanide, both of which are super poisonous, like basically guaranteed to kill you. So they poison his food, they poison his drink, and like, all right, this is going to do it. So they give him his poison food, and they give him a drink. Rasputin eats all the food, drinks the wine, nothing happens. It's like, this guy should be dead. He's ingested arsenic and cyanide, both of which will kill you just fine. And he's like, no big problem. So they're kind of like freaking out. So then they go in and they shoot him. Okay, they go in and they shoot him, and and he finally drops. Okay, like, all right, he's finally dead now. And so they go out and they come back. He starts to get back up again. So he survived the poisoning. He survived the gunshot. So now they go and they just start beating him and stabbing him and stuff down to where he's basically motionless on the ground. And they wrap him in a rug, and they take him and they throw him in a river. Okay, and this is actually Rasputin fished out of the river sometime after that. And when they did the autopsy, they found water in his lungs, which means Rasputin was dead. Like he finally had died, but he died of drowning. So he had survived the shooting, the beating, the rat poisoning, all that kind of stuff, and finally drowned. So the kind of creepy end of Rasputin, like, did he have the mystical powers kind of stuff. But there he is. So Rasputin is dead, but the damage is done. The people of Russia are on the brink of rebellion. All they need is a little push, and the Germans are going to provide that push. And this man is that push, Vladimir Lenin. Vladimir Lenin is a Russian. He has been kicked out of Russia for his extremist political views, namely communism. So he was a Marxist. He's a communist, and he is kicked out of Russia. Well, the Germans find him, bring him back into Russia, smuggle him back in, where he's met at the train station by his friends Leon Trotsky and Joseph Stalin. And those men are going to set about the Russian Revolution. Okay? So he's going to rile the Russians up. They're going to rise up in rebellion. Forces at first the king to abdicate his throne, and then eventually a full-on civil war breaks out between what they call the White Russians, who are loyal to the king, and the Red Russians, who are loyal to Lenin, the communists. So what happens is this. Nicholas and his family are captured. Okay? The Red Russians have him. And the question is now, what do they do with him? So they basically keep him prisoner. They move him around a bunch of places. But the fear is that because the civil war is raging on, and who's going to win, they don't know. They're really afraid of the White Russians recapturing the royal family, then using that as this big morale boost, and they kind of lose it. So eventually, a decision is made to kill the Russian family. All right, so this is the house that they were currently in. The decision is made to have them executed. So basically, they're woke up one night. They're told they're being moved, which at this point they're kind of used to, and they're told to go down to the basement and wait for people to come and get their stuff and take them to somewhere else. So this is the room that they were waiting in. This is facing the other way. There's a staircase. So if this was the room, there'd be a staircase up here, which led to the first floor of the house. And so they're sitting in this room, the royal family and their servants, and coming down the stairs. So I'd be coming down this way, facing this back wall that you're looking at. We're, instead of people there to take their baggage and move them, we're assassins. And they brought guns, and they just mowed down the family, and you can see the bullet holes and that kind of stuff, and wiped out the Tsar and his entire family. So it was a really tragic event, and that was the end of the Romanov dynasty and the Russian royal family. Okay? Well, and this is, by the way, the house of this church has been built on the site of where that was. So if you're ever in Russia, this church is actually the site of where the royal family was killed. But so what happens is this: a couple decades later, this woman in Germany tries to commit suicide. She jumps off a bridge, tries to commit suicide, and she lives. She's taken to a hospital. No one knows who she is. She's got scars all over her body, and when she wakes up, she says, "I am Anastasia." So if I back up, Anastasia is this one right here. So she says, "I am Anastasia, and actually survived the murder of my family." Okay, and people are like, "Oh, okay, this is kind of crazy," but she's the right age. She has kind of scars all over her body, which indicates she's gone through some sort of trauma. And she actually knows things. When people who are around the royal family that survived hear this, they go and investigate. And she knows things that a random person wouldn't know about Anastasia and love for animals. Some of her child, Anastasia's childhood friends, talk to this woman hey, that kind of sounds like Anastasia. So some people are kind of hey, is this really her? And the fact that she survived the assassination attempt isn't totally unbelievable, because these are some diamonds that were found at the execution site. These women were royal. They were literally wearing diamond-encrusted dresses, which diamonds are the hardest, one of the hardest substances we have. They're basically wearing the world's most expensive bulletproof vests. Um, so there is a possibility that the diamonds in the dress of Anastasia could have, blocked some of the bullets, and she was injured but not killed. And she said that one of the assassins took sympathy on her, and basically she escaped, and he kind of let her go. So it was like, hey, maybe it's her, maybe it's not. And basically for the rest of her life, there was this kind of mystery of is this actually Anastasia? Some people are like, no way. Some people are yes. Well, she dies, okay, and claiming to the day she died that she was Anastasia, and some people totally believed it. Well, in 1990, the Soviet Union collapsed. And when the Soviet Union collapsed, uh, Americans were actually able to go, there, and we basically investigated. We got samples of the Romanov remains had been found. And here's the other thing: all the bodies of the royal family had been found except for Anastasia and Alexei. Okay, now there's no way Alexei survived. He was hemophilia. There's no way he lived. But Anastasia's body was never actually recovered. So it's like, hey, that kind of matches. But they took DNA from the Romanovs. They took her DNA and they compared it, and it wasn't a match. That this she was totally lying. She was actually a servant in the family, and that's how she knew those kind of like certain details that ordinary people wouldn't know. And they did eventually find Anastasia and Alexa's body. They were just buried like 100 feet off in a different direction. So, unfortunately, Anastasia, the mystery wasn't really a mystery at all. Um, Anastasia unfortunately did pass away with the rest of her family. Um, there you go. The big thing for um, the Allies in World War One is when the Red Russians actually eventually won, and Vladimir Lenin became the leader of what is now the Soviet Union. He had no interest in World War One and withdrew. So now the war is over for Russia. Germany no longer has to worry about them, and now can focus all of their attention on the West. Okay, so for the Allies, they've lost an ally in Russia, they've gained an ally in the United States, but the United States is not there yet. The United States still has to train its troops, get them equipped into Europe. So the war is now going to come to a close, and we're going to see at our next one who's going to win and what the effects of the war are going to be.